it's high time, and I think we should start. So, dear participants, dear webinar participants, all who are watching us live on Facebook or on the Rooryck website, my name is Alexander Beresko. I'm a general board member of European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. And welcome to our first of the two webinars, which is called the Right Retention Strategy for Early Career Researchers. As we all remember, Plan S is an initiative for open access science publishing launched in 2018 by Coalition S, a consortium of national research agencies and funders from many European countries. The main goal is to assure that no science is locked behind paywalls. In January 2021, Coalition S started implementing its rights retention strategy to give researchers supported by a Coalition S organization the freedom to submit manuscripts for publication to their journal of choice, including subscription journals, whilst remaining fully compliant with Plan S. So let me invite Mr. Johan Rooryck, linguist and executive director of Coalition S, and Ms. Sally Rumsey, open access expert of Coalition S, to actually tell us more about this. The stage is yours, please.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for inviting us. So I will present the first half of the presentation, and then Sally will take over. I will share my screen with you now, but the host has disabled screen sharing. So if you could give me access to...
Okay, I will try to do it now. One second.
I'm still not able to share, Alexander.
Please 1 second, I just need to figure out how to... Could you please try now?
Yes, now it works. Thank you. Yes, there we go. So happy to give this seminar on the rights retention strategy, as it is an important piece of work for Coalition S, and one of the policies to allow you indeed, as Alexander said, to publish in your journal of choice, even when that is a subscription journal or a hybrid journal. The rights retention strategy is actually much broader than just a policy, I think, of Coalition S. It also is aimed at giving the author back control of their manuscript. Namely, it's based on a simple principle, namely that the peer-reviewed, author-accepted manuscript is the intellectual creation of the authors and belongs to them, not to the publishers. We believe that delivering publication services certainly entitles the publisher to a payment, but not a payment that should involve the ownership of the author-accepted manuscript. We want to pay for publishing services, but not with ownership. That's very important. And the AAM should remain the intellectual ownership in the intellectual property of the author. We also want to make sure that funders and universities should ensure that researchers are not deprived of intellectual ownership rights. That is a valuable asset. The reason for this is that if you have intellectual ownership of the AAM, that means that you can reuse it as you see fit, and you can also disseminate it at the time of publication without further delays or embargoes. And this, of course, fits in our key objectives. All research funded by Coalition's organization is open access without embargo, with a CC BY license, or by exception CC BY ND, but that's a minority of cases. We aim this policy at providing researchers with the opportunity to seek publication in their journals of choice, including subscription and hybrid journals, as I said, and these are journals that do not have a transformative arrangement. Transformative arrangements, as you may know, are those agreements between libraries and other institutions on the one hand and publishers on the other that allow authors to publish for free in open access in those journals, because it is the libraries who are paying and who are converting their subscription fees, their subscription payments into publish and read deals with those publishers. But not all journals are yet under that regime. So we needed to find something that would make sure that all of our funded research was in open access, even if it was behind the subscription wall, and that is the rights retention strategy. Why do we do this? Well, we see this as an incentive to encourage subscription publishers to develop publishing options that are in line with the policies of Coalition S, including transformative agreements and also transformative journals. We want the market to adapt to us. We want the market to adapt to full and immediate open access. Subscription journals is really something that is from the beginning of the 20th century. And also we want to empower all researchers working under a coalition as mandate to retain sufficient rights to the peer-reviewed version of their own work. This is very important to us, the retention of rights to that author accepted manuscript. What's in it for you as the author, as a young researcher? What's in it for you? Well, first of all, you retain ownership. That is, I think, one of the most important things. What does that mean? It means that you can reuse and share it as you see fit, without restrictions imposed by the publisher. We do allow the publisher to retain the version of record. They can own the version of record. And this is, in fact, the kind of Solomonic deal that we propose to the publishers. Leave us the AM, you can own the VOR version of record and curate that. We, of course, recognize that publishers provide the means to organize peer review, but that is carried out for free and it's part of the scholarly discourse. And of course, this process must be paid, but the selection of the authority accepted manuscript peer review and the organization of that peer review is largely paid for these days by subscription, in subscription journals by the subscription, and in gold open access journals by the APC. And the same is true, of course, for hybrid journals. I mean, those fees have been paid for, in our view. Why should you be publishing in open access to begin with? I mean, well, because of visibility. There is this article by POR and colleagues that shows that in 2019, 31% of all journal articles are available OA. But in fact, already 52% of article views are to OA articles. So the habits of people are changing. They no longer go to the library to see a paper copy of the journal. They look online. If they can find the journal article online, they will read it. If they cannot find it, well, then it's just invisible. So POR et al. Estimate that by 2025, 44% of articles will be available in OA. That's not so much of an increase if you look at it, but 70% of article views will be to OA articles. And that, I think, is very important because it shows that if your article as a young researcher, and 3 years from now, of course, 4 years from now is nothing for a young researcher, if your article 4 years from now is still behind the paywall, you will simply not be seen. Your article will not be seen. You might as well be publishing on the dark web. Nobody will see it, right? So you need to publish open access for your own good, because that's where you will be seen. That's how you will be cited. We know open access articles have a citation advantage, a visibility advantage. That's why you should do it. Rights retention strategy is simple and clear. It cuts through the publisher complexity. Very many legacy publishers are adding confusion for authors with all sorts of embargoes. Sally will talk about that a little bit later. And we simply want to be clear. Authors should retain their rights to the AM. It's their work. It's their creation. We pay for publishing services. That is not a problem, but payment should not include ownership and control of the contents of an author's work, because it happens very often, as you know, that you publish in a journal, and then you have to pay to even have access to your own to your own paper or to reuse material in it. So, for instance, those beautiful graphs that you made 2 years ago in an article, if you want to reuse them for another article, you have to ask the publisher for permission. We think that is entirely silly. That should simply not be the case. I mean, those graphs are graphs that you made, not the publisher. So why would you have to ask for permission? So what is the problem that we seek to resolve with the rights retention strategy? Well, there is a bit of a conflict between the requirements of the publisher on the one hand and the requirements of the funders on the one hand. Well, let me explain. The minimum requirement for Coalition S open access is that the author accepted manuscript be in a repository with zero embargo and a CC BY license. That's the very minimum what we want. I mean, if anything, this is what an article should comply with. This also now has become an obligation through Coalition S organization grants agreement. So from whether you have a grant from the Wellcome or from the EC or from any other national European organization or from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, this applies. So your article should be at the very least in a repository with zero embargo and a CC BY license if it is not fully open access in a gold open access journal. Now, at the same time, with these old-fashioned journals, subscription journals, and hybrid OA journals, you sign a publishing agreement that gives away your right to deposit the AAM in a repository with zero embargo and a CC BY license. You transfer your rights, your copyrights, so to speak, to the publisher. And that, of course, is a contradiction. There is a contradiction here between the researcher's grant agreement, which says you have to publish open access and your AAM has to be in a repository, and the publisher's agreement, on the other hand, that says, well, you can't do that, and sign here, right? And that is the conflict that the rights retention strategy is trying to resolve, and it resolves it by what we call legal precedents, namely, since the CC BY that is in the grant agreement of the Coalition S organization has applied earlier than the later copyright transfer agreement, it has legal precedence over the later agreement. So even if you sign that later agreement, it is null and void, right? I mean, you better not do it if you can, but the prior license will take legal precedence over any later agreement you might sign. So that is very important. This is something that you can do. This is in your agency. Prior license or prior obligation, you will sometimes meet those words, especially if you have a grant from the EC. All these grant agreements will require open access, requires that sufficient intellectual property rights are retained with the OA obligations. With Wellcome, for instance, and many other funders, this will happen through automatically applying a CC BY license to all future manuscripts. So the contract will state, well, dear researcher, from now on, under this grant agreement that you are signing, everything you write will automatically have a CC BY applied to it. So that's basically the grant funder who takes this initiative and who makes sure that everything that comes out of the grant has a CC BY applied to it. So this is called the prior license. There's also a slightly different mechanism, which is called the prior obligation, and this is used by the EC in the ERC grant agreements. That is prior obligation. That agreement obliges, puts the onus, puts the burden, if you like, on the beneficiaries of the grant, and the beneficiaries of the grant are personally responsible for applying the CC BY to the AAM or to the VOR and make sure that the article is deposited in a repository. So it is also part of the grant condition, but in a slightly different manner. The result is the same in both cases. The article that you publish in a subscription journal or in a hybrid journal has to be deposited, you have to retain CC BY on the AAM, and it has to be deposited in a repository with that CC BY. Now, we always prefer the version of record over the AAM if we think prices are fair and reasonable. We make contributions to transformative agreements and to transformative journals. I mean, we want to have a world in open access, and we do want to pay for the authors for a fair price. And we see the rights retention strategy basically as a fallback position while these transformative agreements or transformative journals are not present yet. We really see this as an incentive and as a fallback position, where there is no planners aligned way to make the VOR open access. How do we do this, the rights retention strategy? How have you carried it out? Well, there were 3 steps to implementation. First of all, we have to update the grant conditions. Well, grant conditions as of 1st of January 2021 and a little bit later for the EC and for some other funders. This will come into application in the next few months. For some other funders, grant conditions specify that authors must apply this public copyright license to all future author accepted manuscript and deposit these in the repository. So that is now going to be in every grant condition in every grant agreement you will sign with the Coalition S funder. Okay, second one, the second element is that we had to inform publishers, because of course the publisher cannot know that specific grants carry this. So we inform publishers publishing collectively 95% of Coalition S work, that this would apply, that we are taking back ownership of the AAM, and that we would incorporate responses to their responses to this in the journal checker tool. So whether or not they would be supporting this policy, or whether they would even accept article submissions that carry the rights retention, that come under the rights retention strategy. And then as a third element, we will ask then Coalition S grant holders to include details of the public license in these submissions and to deposit a copy of the AAM in a repository on publications, as I have already said many times now. So let's briefly look at what that looks like. What we basically ask you to do as a researcher is this. We ask you to include this language in cursive into your submissions to a subscription journal or a hybrid journal. So you first have to say, my research was funded by this funder, and then it's clear to the publisher that this is a Coalition S funder. And then you say a CC BY or equivalent license is applied to the AAM arising from the submission in accordance with the grant's open access conditions. That's need to be included. And by including that, this magic language, you retain ownership of your paper. This is very important. You retain the ownership on the AAM of your paper, and that allows you then to deposit it in a repository. And how does a researcher know? How does a researcher like yourself know whether a journal is a gold open access journal, or whether you have to apply the rights retention strategy, or even when it is under a transformative agreement? All of this is very confusing to a young researcher, we believe, and that's why we developed the journal checker tool. So the journal checker tool allows researchers to identify how their journal of choice meets with these planet's conditions. This journal checker tool we developed in the following way, like a search engine. Basically, you type in your journal name, you type in your funder and your institution, and that gives you a result. And the result allows you to see whether you should pay for a gold APC fee and your funder will pay for it, whether there is a transformative agreement and you can publish also for free because the library is paying for it, whether this is a transformative journal and your funder is or is not paying for the transformative journal, or whether you have to really make use of the rights retention strategy to make your article available in full and immediate open access. So basically, this allows you to see what you need to do once you want to publish in your favorite journal. Very easily. There is even a widget that you can use for this, so you can have really very easy access to this. And this has been available since November 2020. It's really an easy and convenient tool that you can find on our website. And this is where I will hand over the presentation to Sally.
Thank you, Johan. We have created a number of resources that are freely available for download on the Coalition S website that are there for you to use and share. There is an infographic describing the rights retention strategy, a handout, and a couple of slide decks that can be used, particularly if you want to run a training session. Thank you. So from a legal perspective, the rights retention strategy works by this idea of the priority of the CC BY license. It goes on before the license lands on the desk of the journal when you submit it. So it's that the CC BY license comes in first, and it means that it's there, as Johan has described, and it sits there and it can't be removed. It's sort of glued to the submission that you submit. Now, we're talking here for Coalition S funded researchers, but this is something that all researchers could use if they wished, by using a variant of the wording that Johan has already demonstrated there. And it's this key wording that the CC BY license is applied to any accepted manuscript arising from this submission. Thank you. So if there's a disagreement with the publisher, we think this is unlikely, but just in case that there were, Authors, Coalition S funded authors are encouraged to contact their funder or their libraries. Certainly the funders will pick this up and sort out what happened and a communication with the publisher if there is any disagreement. If you're not talking to your librarians already about any matters to do with scholarly communications, I strongly recommend that you do anyway. But what we're saying is that Coalition S funders will obviously step into the breach here, but if all authors were to pick this up, then have a chat to your librarian about this anyway, and I'm sure they'll be able to advise. And we should just add that Coalition S is in discussion with some university associations about them thinking about a rights retention strategy for their institutions. Some countries have touched on this already, but this is a conversation which we think is really important for researchers and their institutions to have. So you may find that when you submit to a journal that you see various communications and information that is attempting to clarify what's going on. But in fact, a lot of the information that we have seen out there is rather confusing. We have seen statements such as, you cannot use the rights retention statement when submitting to this journal. That is not true. You can and you should. And the journal is well within its rights to refuse your paper on the grounds that you've used that wording, but it's your right to use that wording. And the only option for that journal, as I say, is to actually refuse your paper. If a journal states that it doesn't allow accepted manuscripts to be made open access under the rights retention strategy, that is not correct. In fact, the rights retention strategy does take precedence over restrictions that the publisher may impose. So again, it comes down to either the paper is accepted with it or it's rejected. And some journals are maybe threatening that they will ask you to sign a contract pledging that you will respect their embargo despite your using the rights retention strategy wording. Now, this is a trick, really, because it is trying to subvert the rights retention strategy. If you do sign something like that, you will be in breach of your grant agreement, which you agreed to previously. So really, in this sort of situation, you should submit elsewhere or not sign that agreement that you're presented with there. You can't have both. They're in conflict, as Johan has already described.
And definitely contact us.
Yes, definitely contact us. Let us know, please. Thank you, Johan. So choosing the green route means that your work is under an embargo not compatible with your funder's policy. As I've already said, if you've submitted using the CC BY license, the rights retention strategy wording, that takes precedence over any publisher embargo. And then this idea that you have to pay an APC to be compliant with your funder, even if that funder will not reimburse. For example, if this is a hybrid journal, which Coalition S funders will not fund APCs for unless they have a transformative arrangement. Now here, it's never a condition for compliance that an APC payment is made. As Johan has already said very clearly, Coalition S funders are willing to pay fair and reasonable prices for open access, and they mostly prefer the version of record to be made open access. That's what they're trying to get to. However, if it doesn't provide a suitable open access route, then this is where the rights retention strategy kicks in. This should suffice. It should not be a condition for compliance. Thank you, Johan. And similarly, we've seen instances where there's no option but to agree to pay for an APC for publication, even if the funder does not. Now, this is really quite concerning, because what it would do is commit you or your institution to paying that APC, because your funder has clearly stated they will not pay it in this particular circumstance. So don't fall for that one. Submit elsewhere. don't commit to paying an APC. You would have to find the money from somewhere if you commit at that point. And then the rights retention strategy will undermine academic publishers and their transition to open access. Well, I think we're still, all of us, waiting to see this actually manifest itself somewhere. You may be well aware of physics papers in the archive preprint server, many of which are accepted manuscripts. They have been going strong for many a year now, mid-1990s, and physics journals that correspond to those papers are still going strong because people respect the version of record for citing and so on. But just the fact that the accepted manuscript is out there and able to be used by the authors as they choose does not seem to affect the journals themselves. The Royal Society too, take that, and others, they allow zero embargo on accepted manuscripts. These are respectable and very healthy publishers that are doing this. So there is little proof. And finally, the repositories where you deposit your accepted manuscript are well healthy and well able to house your work, and they are also largely compliant with Plan S. They're doing a great job out there. So we've already touched a little bit on what is very complex about what publishers are asking of authors. The journals often have different embargoes. They might have different embargoes in different situations. This is very confusing and very difficult to work out what each of them wants. As we've already mentioned, there are conflicts between the publisher's policy and the funder's policy. They're in direct conflict often and have been for some time. This is why the rights retention strategy is attempting to cut through this morass of policy stacks which we've been encountering. There's time spent for both the researcher and for their librarian support staff in checking, applying and releasing embargoes for different publishers. It takes an awful lot of time and effort, that. And then there are some really rather odd and I would say crazy restrictions on dissemination. Things like some publishers will permit you to put the accepted manuscript immediately without embargo on your personal website, but not in an institutional repository, which to me just seems very confusing and rather pointless. And then you can put your accepted manuscript in free repositories, but not in commercial ones. So you have to check which ones you're allowed to use. And then another thing that you might be allowed to share your accepted manuscript with invited groups of a limited size, but not beyond. And this, in the 21st century, does seem rather ridiculous. And you should be free to share your work with whom and when whom and however whom you wish. And the result of all of this is that with these embargoes, your accepted manuscript can be locked up for months. What we think, thank you, Johan, is that the rights retention strategy is simple. Just use this wording and then your accepted manuscript is yours to use and share as you please. So here's a rather frivolous way of describing this. If you get in a decorator to decorate your house, you pay them to do certain jobs. You might want them to sand the woodwork or strip the wallpaper. And you pay for his services or her services. But at the end of the job, after you've paid for the undercoating and overcoating, painting every part, you do not expect the decorator to own your house after he's painted it. And you certainly do not hand over the keys and ownership of your house to your decorator, no matter how pleasant and obliging they might be. And so finally, we're finishing on a message to all researchers to retain your intellectual assets. We believe at Coalition S that publishers should not obtain the ownership of your assets as an author in exchange for delivering publication services. We will pay fair and reasonable costs for those publication services, but not hand over the ownership. So to all authors, exercise your rights by retaining your rights. Use them, don't lose them. And finally, some contact details for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. stop sharing so we can answer some questions, perhaps.
Okay, thanks a lot for this presentation, Johan and Sally. It was, from my point of view, very clear. And okay, but still we have some questions, and I would like you to answer them. So first of all, about this magic phrase, let's say. So adding a magic phrase like regarding the CC BY license to your manuscript will protect you, right? Is it just enough? It may sound real magic. So we just add this phrase and you are protected. So is it really enough to add this?
Yes, it sounds rather unbelievable, doesn't it? I mean, but it really does. I mean, we have tested this. We have asked legal advice on this, and let's not forget that the rights retention strategy has been out since July 2020, and the publishers have not yet sued us for this, saying you are legally in the wrong. Right? That has not happened. So apparently the magic language does work. Also, we have papers out there using the rights retention language, and they have been published, and authors have made use of the right. And again, I mean, the sky has not come down on us. So it is a quite powerful tool. And let's not forget that, in fact, we live in a very strange world. We live in the world, an upside down world in a way, where we have been taught that it's normal to hand over our ownership to the publisher, but that is only true in academic publishing. That is not true anywhere else. I mean, anywhere else, if you write something or if you make something, if you make a painting, you know, develop some software of your own, you are the creator, you are the owner. I mean, that's where it starts. You have the author's rights. The trouble begins when you sign a paper saying, I am ceding all of my rights to the publisher. That's where the trouble begins. As long as you don't do that and you assert your rights, right, by saying a CC BY license is applied to the AAM arising from this manuscript, then you assert your rights, your ownership rights on that manuscript. And moreover, as Sally has said, by doing so, that right is attached to that paper forever. I mean, it cannot be turned back. It is a permanent, it is a part of the permanent record of that paper. So that's why it's so hard to overturn it, you see. But it is true that it seems rather magical, right? I mean, 10 words and you change the world.
Yeah.
But you do.
Okay, thanks.
And that's where every one of us can make a contribution. You use 10 words in every paper, and it's yours to use and reuse and disseminate. Imagine that.
Okay, so next question. Does this magical license exist for those without a Plan S funder?
Yes, it does exist. I mean, as you can see, if you look at the magical language, there's two parts, right? One says, okay, this paper was funded by this funder, so and so on and so forth. And then the CC BY license is applied. So there's basically two parts. One where you state the funder, the other one where you make a personal statement applying the CC BY. Now, why these two parts? Well, obviously, I mean, in the case that you are funded by a funder, you have some support, let's say, right? I mean, you can go back if the publisher tries to bully you into some sort of something or other, then you can go back to the funder and say, funder, will you please do this for me? That is not the case if you're not funded. I mean, it's much harder. So to speak. I mean, of course, you can go to your institution, you can go to your library, you can still try and contact us. I mean, you know, why not? I mean, we will probably try and help anyway. But you do not have that same protection. You're much more on your own. But we believe it's worth it because, as we said, it is not as if this specific part has been contested. And the worst that can happen is that the publisher said, "Well, I'm sorry, but if your paper carries this language, we will not be able to publish it." But then they should be upfront about it. And as Sally has shown, they have not been upfront about it. I mean, we have asked them to respond, and they have basically said back in October, they basically said, well, we we are not going to officially answer you. Basically, that was the we reserve. So basically, we could not put anything into the journal checker tool because none of the publishers explicitly said that they would refuse articles carrying the rights retention strategy. So that's a lot of negatives, but basically they did not say that whether they would or would not accept those articles. So what we're seeing now is a bit of what we would like to call guerrilla tactics, right? I mean, they are using these tactics that what we call smoke and mirrors in the slides to confuse, to daze and confuse authors. Right? But there is, I mean, but that's all it is. It's smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, we are not saying that it is easy for you when you don't have a funder, but it is definitely possible, and we will support you. This will become a movement, we believe. Thanks
a lot. This question arises because we have some viewers outside the European Union, of course, and they're also interested in open access publishing, and which is logical. So another question about the mentioned journal checking tool, which is brilliant. Could you, could be the journal checker tool helpful also to other researchers who are not under PLOS requirements? Again,
Sally, perhaps. Sorry.
It is focused basically on Coalition S funders. So that's where putting the funder information in. It has been designed for grantees from Coalition S funders. So I would think that for other, I don't actually know how it works if you don't put a funder in at all.
I think you can fake it, right? You imagine you're from the Netherlands and you don't have, or you're from Poland, for instance, and you don't have a fund, you don't have the funding from NCN, it is, I believe, that is in Coalition S. You don't have funding. You can still fake it, right? You can still act as if you were funded by that funder, and then see what you should do if you were in that situation. Because it can give you interesting information. It can give you information, for instance, about transformative agreements, which are not funder dependent. They are library dependent, right? It can give you information about gold open access journals, which again is not funder dependent. Gold open access journals are journals that ask a fee regardless, right? It can give you information about diamond open access funders where you don't have to you don't have to pay at all. So I do think that even for researchers without a funder, it's an interesting tool. You can just put in any funder you would like to be funded by, and then see what the results are. But we have that information about the funder because sometimes funders contribute money to these specific transformative agreement schemes and these transformative journal schemes. That's why we have it in there.
Okay, thanks. Another question. As far as I understand, if publisher just stands on his or her positions, just like I will not accept this magical phrase, let's say. So the one and only option is to just go away.
Yes, and what will happen though, that if this happens repeatedly, because of course we are at the beginning of the rights retention strategy, right? But if we as funders receive information that this happens repeatedly with a funder, then we will mark that funder as non-compliant in the journal checker tool. We will say, look, researchers, don't go there, don't bother, because if it carries the rights retention strategy, then you cannot publish there. And we know that. We want authors to be informed about this beforehand. I think that's reasonable to ask, not have them jump to 36 hoops to then find out that the article should not be submitted there. We don't want that. We want clear information for our researchers. We believe that our researchers have a right to clear information. And actually, you are going to write a letter about that in the coming days, an open letter signed by various people to make that very clear.
I think one other thing which seems to be cropping up is we're seeing that they're tackling it on a case-by-case basis, which is just taking more time and more trouble, I think, for all involved. So as Johan says, you know, it's the clarity which is needed really, rather than thinking, well, if I submit there, will it be accepted or not? I'm really not sure, you know, and then I've got to go and contact somebody, and then we've got to have a conversation. It just needs clarity, yes, no, and then at least you know where you stand.
Thanks a lot. Could you imagine a situation when, let's say, a researcher is working in a very narrow field, which has a very limited number of journals, and there are not so many options for this person, and this person has to select and from limited options, and most of them, let's say, are blocked, and there is no option to go away. What to do in this case?
Do you want me to take that, Johan? Yeah, I mean, the thing
go
is,
ahead.
it comes down to money, doesn't it? Because I mean, if the journal is going to charge, if you're obliged to make your work open access, and the journal is going to charge, and your funder's not going to pay, then somebody's going to have to pay for that, aren't they? So the choice comes there. I mean, the other thing is that why are they refusing the rights retention strategy? You know, as we've already said, it's not causing the downfall of journals. So I think as a researcher, you know, be aware, this is your work. You want to hang on to this. You want to be able to use it. What you don't want to do is hand it over and then find you can't use it. As I've been showing and all that, you know, you might want to put it in ResearchGate. You know, you may want to put it in there and you can't. You may want to share it broadly and put it out there on your institutional repository, but you're having to put it on your, you know, you have to work out which repository can I put it on and what can I do. It's, you know, just think about it from keeping your ownership and perspective, rather than sort of saying, oh, you know, we're paying you lots of money, but you're not allowing me to do all these things with my work that I've created. Yeah.
But there is the issue of these very small fields where you have only 4 or 5 options for publishing, and that doesn't go away. Now, Planes has promised that we would look into that. So if that is the case, do contact us and we can look into this. Maybe look at diamond open access journals in that area, because also let's not forget that, I mean, very often there's more than one option. Maybe there's also journals that you're not thinking about because they are not yet the most prestigious journals in that area. But also note that Coalition S has subscribed to the principles of DORA and other policies like the Hong Kong principles that try to stay away from these prestige factors like impact factor or prestige publishers. I mean, from now on, all of the funders will be looking at the quality of the research rather than the quantity or the journal impact factor. They will take that into account for submissions of grants. So we expect that in the next 5 to 10 years, the notion of prestige of a journal is going to diminish quite a bit. So that means that various journals, even the ones that you are not thinking of right now as appropriate journals, will become simply appropriate outlets. So for instance, you should look into diamond open access journals that don't ask for a fee. We know that there are 30,000 diamond open access journals out there. Certainly there should be one among them that could also serve your needs if you are in a small field. So, you know, we have to look at things a little bit differently from now on, right? Not in terms of prestige, not in terms of, oh, but my research can only be published in these 5 prestigious journals. No, you know, let's try to look a little bit widely, and let's try to publish in those journals. Because if you publish your best research in those diamond open access journals, those journals will become better as a result if your research is so good, right? I mean, that is what will happen, and that is what we want.
Thanks for this. Regarding, before moving to other questions, do you think that this, let's say, change in attitude to prestige, when might it happen? So how many times do we have to educate people and to explain that, for instance, a journal which is not in specific database maybe, or doesn't have such high impact factor, is but which complies to open access policy and other important things, is good enough for researchers.
Yes, well, that's why we are using the DOAJ, right? I mean, Sally can add to this as well. We use the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is a measure of quality of open access journals. It also excludes a number of predatory open access journals. So we want as many open access journals as possible to become members or to become vetted by DOAJ. So that is one measure of quality that you can use, because it includes both technical quality and scientific quality. So that, I think, will help in identifying good open access journals. Sally?
Yeah, I was thinking, when is this idea going to kick in? The thing with the idea of prestige and quality and evaluation, that's not something that Coalition S can do on its own. It's not something a researcher can do on their own. It needs to be a whole group of organizations, such as institutions and employers, all working together. And I think everybody needs to play their part in this in order to keep it moving, which it is moving. I think you see more and more institutions signing up to, as we've used the DORA, using that as shorthand.
But especially, I think early career researchers have a responsibility here, especially a responsibility in pushing back to their elders. Because I know, I mean, the ECRs are in that unenviable situation where they are still evaluated by an older generation who does not see open access as a priority, who still is wedded to these ideas of prestige. And that's where we need pushback. We need to, I've been a supervisor of PhD dissertations myself, and I always said my PhDs educated me, not the other way around. Maybe also a little bit the other way around, but I learned. What I know from my PhDs. The same should be true, actually. The same should be true in the rewards and incentive system. You have to convince the older generation that these ideas of prestige are a thing of the past, that we need to move towards a system where quality is evaluated over quantity. Because we all know how we can write 10 papers instead of 1 paper, right? It's not difficult to make quantity. It is much more difficult to evaluate quality, and that is the system that we want to work towards, and all Coalition S members are convinced of that. So slowly, I think, within the next 5 to 10 years, and this 5 to 10 years, especially for ECRs, that's the time when you will be evaluated for associate professor and full professor, and those are the rules that will be applied then, whether you like it or not. So you better start thinking about things in those terms right now.
Yes, indeed. But just one short question, Gary, what do you think is the key to good quality-based evaluation, not quantity-based evaluation?
Those are very difficult questions. Those are questions that we are thinking about now with the experts in Coalition S. One of the things that you get, there's various, we are making a basket of best practices with the group. Some of these best practices can also be found on the DORA website, for instance. So one of the things we think of is what is called a narrative CV. So basically, you're not asked to provide a list of all of your publications with the journal impact factor. No, you are being asked to provide a list that does not include the impact factor. Nobody is interested by your impact factor. And it only is limited to a list of 10 articles. And you have to say to this committee why you think that these are your 10 best articles in a narrative. And that is what is being evaluated. So basically, your powers of persuasion about your own quality is what is on the table there. So that's one way of evaluating quality. See that, and that's just one. There's 10 other examples like this that we can use to evaluate quality. But it is a long road because we really have to completely rethink the system.
The funders are looking at grant applications. That's another area. So when you put in a grant for funding, they will be looking at how they are looking at the application and judging one against another. and by not using impact factor and so on. So that's something that Coalition S funders can do and are doing.
Yes, and are doing in some jurisdictions. I know, for instance, that some funders explicitly instruct the members of a committee not to look at the journal impact factor. They're not allowed to look it up on their phones. They're not allowed to look up the H-index. They're explicitly instructed to disregard that information and to only look at quality. So the system is changing. I mean, it's changing slowly, but it will change.
And I've just seen one other thing that certainly Wellcome Trust is doing is encouraging the institutions to adopt DORA or a similar type of initiative there. So it's not any one actor that's dealing with this. It has to be all of them in conjunction. But I think researchers themselves are at the center of this. You're the ones affected by it. So, you know, keep aware, keep talking to people and keep encouraging.
And Wellcome is one of the more muscular funders in this regard, because they will go in and they say, please, institution, please tell us how you applied DORA, show us, because otherwise, you know, we may not be interested in funding you any longer. I mean, you know, funders have a way of being very persuasive. Also, the EC will be looking at this, will be looking at a new rewards and incentive system. So it is coming. I mean, this we are no longer going to be doing business in the next 5 to 10 years as we did in the last 20. That is a fact.
Thanks. That's very inspirational. Just another small question. You mentioned that, I mean, Coalition S mentioned that, so publishers will still be paid fairly for the services they provide, like article processing and whatever else. I know that this might be not that specific, and there are differences between different areas, whatever else, but what do you consider the, let's say, fair article processing charges in general? What I mean, the sum of money, which is fair in your opinion?
You want a sum? You want
yes, exactly.
a number?
If it's possible, I mean, but it's very interesting because fair can be, one sum can be fair in Netherlands, but not that fair in Poland. And
exactly. Well, that's, I mean, I think I mean, but this is my personal opinion, and Sally may differ and other people may differ. My personal opinion is that in Western Europe, what somebody in Western Europe should, I mean, the costs are probably something around 1,500 euros in my estimation. That does not mean, however, that if you live in Poland or in Turkey, that's the price that you should be paying. This is also something that we're thinking about. We haven't developed that very well yet, but we would like to think about a system of payment. Let's say again something that could be rolled out in 5 to 10 years, where everybody pays according to their means, rather than everybody pays one fixed sum. This is what we call equitable payment for academic publishing. For instance, I mean, this is something that exists in medication, for instance. I mean, you don't pay the same price for aspirin if you live in Oslo or if you live in New Delhi. I mean, there's actually a factor 10 difference or something like that. So basically something like that is what we should probably think about, that we pay different prices for the same services as a function of purchasing power parity, and as a function of the size of the institution, as a function of access to grants, and so on and so forth, so that everybody contributes, rather than the system of waivers that we have now, which are very often viewed as a little bit neo-colonial and patronizing. Mm-hmm. So that is the system that ideally we would like to move towards. But I mean, if you look at my journal, for instance, I mean, at my journal, we pay 500 euros for an APC. You know, I'm not saying that's probably a little bit low. At some MDPI journals, you pay 1,100 euros. You know, it really depends. But what we want to see is that publishers show us the books, so to speak, that they show what these prices are paying for. We want price transparency.
Mm. And I think there's a sort of thought about what is value. You know, if you could get a research assistant for a year for the price of 2 APCs, you know, that sort of brings some prices into sharp focus. And equally, you know, if there's a very high rejection rate from a journal, well, you know, some researchers may think, hang on a minute, you know, that does seem like a monumental waste of effort, you know, going there and then having to go to another journal. So I think it's there needs to be a discussion about what we're actually paying for. What do we mean by value?
And yes, because I mean, of course, I mean, one of the reasons you're asking this probably is the very high prices that Springer Nature is charging for the nature journals. I could very well imagine actually that is from their point of view, a fair and transparent price. I mean, they reject 92% of articles. So you have to imagine that there are professional publishers hired by Springer Nature who all day long, their job is as trained scientists to reject work, right? And maybe, you know, 1 in 10 articles is something that they can lead on to publication. I mean, that costs money. I mean, so I could imagine that, you know, that adds on very quickly. The question there is not whether, for me at least, the question there is not whether that is a fair price or not a fair price. The question there for me is whether we would want such a system of publishing. Do we really want a publishing system in which we say, well, only 1 article out of 10 is good research, the rest is crap? I mean, I don't think that's a science environment that I would want to live in, because it's also not true. It cannot be true. I mean, you know, if you say, you know, 60%, I mean, 40% is not good enough or not good yet, right? It's not yet good enough. It needs to be revised and resubmitted 2 or 3 times because the methods are not fine and so on. But nobody's going to tell me that 90% of research is in this area. That is simply not believable.
Thanks.
And it's also not something that we can tell society.
Okay. Thanks a lot for this. I'm sorry, but we
Sorry.
have 3 minutes. Only 3
One of my
minutes
pet
left.
peeves.
No, it was very interesting. Thanks a lot. We only have 3 minutes left, so it's time for some final questions. But just in quick answers, maybe. What are the book publishing perspectives in terms of open science?
Yes, book publishing is something that we said we would take on later this year. We will come with a book open access, an open access policy for books. Right now, a number of coalition S funders already have a policy for books, so we will also require over time books to be completely open access and also probably in CC BY, but we need to converge our policies of the various existing policies of the funders, and we will come with a policy in the fall of this year for open access books.
Mm-hmm. I'm receiving extra questions. 1 second.
I see some other questions about why publishers are required to transfer the copyright to them. Well, basically because it's always been done that way. That is the only right answer. Yeah. I mean, Sally, maybe you have another answer.
Yeah, there's various reasons given. We need the copyright to be able to disseminate your work as widely as possible, which is not true. Actually, what a publisher needs is just a permission to publish. They don't need the copyright of your work.
This copyright issue is something that they wanted before, because they took a big risk, right? I mean, they had to print journals, they had to stock them, and they didn't know if they were going to sell them. So that it was some sort of an insurance, if you like. But that's no longer the case, of course, in the digital era. I mean, all of these things are leftovers from 50 years ago that publishers would like to stick to.
Okay.
But we could go on about this for a long time, right, Sally?
Okay, so let me thank you very much for this very informative and very inspirational webinar. And maybe you could make some final comments.
Sally.
Oh, yes. Well, I think things are changing rapidly, and I think early career researchers have got the power and the strength and the vibrancy, I think, to actually really make change in this. Everybody accepts we need change. Coalition S can't do it alone. Coalition S certainly can't change everything all at once, but I think together with the researchers who are at the cutting edge of all of this, we can make change for the better for everyone.
I would second that.
Thanks a lot. Julia, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sally and Johan, for the very interesting session today, and for clarifying the right retention strategy for early career researchers. It was a very great pleasure to have you